Welcome, my name is Dr. Andrew Smith and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. This is in regards to Christianity. Okay, so what I want to argue is why we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So this will link in themes of Christianity, trauma and meaning. And I want to begin by acknowledging something openly. And for many people, Christianity has become associated with harm. What I mean about that is that these experiences have been around control, shame, silencing, and the abuse of power. These experiences are real and they deserve to be taken seriously. So this is not a talk about defending the church as an institution, nor about persuading anyone to believe something they do not believe. However, it is also about separating out some of the personalities and the perpetrators from an organisation. But it is ultimately a talk about discernment, about meaning, and about what happens when we abandon an entire symbolic and spiritual inheritance because of the ways it has been misused. So the bathwater, how I think about the bathwater is that over the past century, particularly in Western culture, there has been a strong movement away from Christianity. And in some ways, this was necessary. Many people needed distance from the moralism, from the fear-based theology, and authoritarian structures that caused real psychological damage to many, many people. But in rejecting those structures, something else often went with them. We did not just throw out the bathwater, we threw out the baby too. And the baby, in this case, is a rich psychological, symbolic, and spiritual framework that helped human beings make sense of suffering, guilt, responsibility, love, sacrifice, forgiveness, and hope. So if we think about it from a psychological lens, from this perspective, Christianity is not just a belief system. It is a symbolic language for the human condition, one in which we've been engaged in thinking about our universe for thousands of years. And this language speaks about wounding and repair, loss and restoration, guilt and forgiveness, death and rebirth, belonging and exile. These are not outdated concerns, they are perennial human realities. These are themes that you may well be experienced in. There are themes that I am experienced in and continue to process as a person. When we remove these symbolic structures without replacing them with something equally coherent, people do not become freer. They become disoriented. They become disconnected. They become isolated. And the joys and power of being in spiritual communities are lost. And given we've been involved in such phenomenon for many thousands of years, this and our brains in effect have developed around this. It's really important to come back to this idea. So firstly, Christianity is a container, not a weapon. Much of the harm associated with Christianity came not from its core ideas, but from the way it was used. Spiritual language became a weapon. Sin replaced curiosity. Obedience replaced conscience. Authority replaced relationship. But misuse does not invalidate essence. From a therapeutic perspective, we know this very, very well. Attachment can harm, but we do not therefore abandon relationship. Power can be abused, but we do not therefore abandon structure. The task is not rejection. The task is integration and discernment. So let's come to the idea of the figure of Christ. And even for those who do not identify as Christian, the figure of Christ remains psychologically potent. Here is a person who enters suffering rather than bypassing it. It's a person who challenges corrupt authority. It's a person who aligns himself with the marginalised, and is someone who refuses to reduce people to their worst actions. And finally, he holds together love and truth without collapsing into either. And this is not sentimental, it is profoundly subversive. And from a trauma-informed lens, this is a model of moral courage and relational depth, not domination. And so we know that Christ was a real person. This was a real person who was acting out these, who profoundly affected so many hundreds and thousands of other people, and it became obviously the largest movement in the world for so long. Still is. And this is something that we need to remember, really, and come back to the core roots. This is a person who demonstrated the qualities of Christ. Was God, demonstrated this in everything that he did. And so this model is something which we can only emulate positively. But what we lose when we reject it all, when Christianity is dismissed wholesale, several things often go missing. A language for forgiveness that is not transactional. So that means being able to forgive, but not just for the sake of it, actually because it's a meaningful, positive thing. A framework for responsibility without annihilating shame. And this is, it's also like kind of without annihilating with shame. Shame does annihilate. And actually it kind of leads to more defensiveness rather than resolution. But we do need to become responsible for our actions and the way we conduct ourselves in the world. But it's what we lose also is a story that holds suffering without rushing to solutions. So it acknowledges and accepts the fact that suffering exists. And if we ignore that, or we ignore the reality of suffering, we just seek to rescue, and actually we become in clinical terms, something called the drama triangle. We become part of a triad in effect, and so we need to step off that. But ultimately, this is, when we dismiss Christianity, we also dismiss a sense of belonging that transcends performance. You belong in the church without needing to really prove it. Now, we want you to be Christian. We want you to embody the qualities that Christ embodied, but it's an encouragement, and it's a goal, and it's something that we work at every single day. You're not going to be thrown out for not being perfect, but there is an encouragement to develop that. But also this is about a moral vision that's rooted in love rather than efficiency. So it's seeing its love, being able to love you and others, rather than looking at how efficient you are at whatever. We then try to replace these with therapy, productivity, or self-optimization, but they cannot carry the same weight. Therapy can only go so far. Productivity can only go so far. And you can only optimize yourself so far before you reach the limit, and where you have to become and transcend and move out of the limitations of your own humanity. So, there's another issue of spirituality without depth. And many people now say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And that impulse makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense that people, and it's positive that people can say they are spiritual. But spirituality without depth, lineage, or discipline often becomes vague and fragile. It becomes kind of like plaiting fog, almost, that we kind of know what we're doing, we can sense the form, but it doesn't really get us anywhere, it doesn't take us anywhere, we can't get hold of it properly. And Christianity at its best is not vague, it's embodied, it's the whole you, it's ethical, it's relational, and it's concerned with how we live, not just how we feel. We lose that seriousness when we abandon it entirely. So I think it's really important to think about the idea of integration rather than regression. To say we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater is not to say we should return to the past. It is not regression. It is integration. And it is about asking ourselves, what in this tradition still serves human flourishing? What speaks to trauma, loss, guilt, repair, and hope? What can be reclaimed without repeating harm? This is mature spirituality. This is psychologically informed spirituality. And this is that which will lead you into your own personal, interpersonal salvation. So the task before us is not belief or disbelief. It's discernment. It's the ability to know the difference. And Christianity does not need defending as an institution, and we definitely cannot, never should, defend those who used Christianity as a cover to act upon their vile, harmful influences. But if we abandon Christianity entirely, we leave a vacuum, and vacuums are rarely filled with wisdom. The invitation is not to go backwards. It's to retrieve what still has life, meaning, and capacity to orient us towards something larger than survival. And that ultimately is what recovery requires.